All righty, so I'll call the meeting to order, and just for those that have joined us from the public, say that, we hope to have future meetings actually back in person as we did, prior to, the occurrences of 2 years ago and lasting through to right now. So I'll ask for to approve the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, the public agenda? Councilor Nunziata? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Seeing none, I'd like a motion to approve the public meeting minutes of March 29th. Everyone was in attendance except Mohammed for that one. Could I have a motion by Debbie? All in favor? All right, thank you. And then item number 5 is the business arising. Those are the sort of the tasks that are complete and in progress. Listed on pages 17. Any questions on it? And then there's also, this includes the community benefits information, which is on pages found on pages 19 through 22. And that's the full recap of the employment that was provided to tenants and the breakout. Any comments or questions on any of that material?
I had a question on, I've lost the document. Just give me a minute, please.
Okay, you'll find it. It's as I said, Debbie, it's pages 18 through 22, and then there's
yeah, no, I just have to.
It goes on into.
No, I just need to find the email.
You're doing business arising right now, John?
That's correct.
In terms of, I had one question actually.
Okay.
Never mind, John. I'll let it go.
You'll let it go? All right. So a motion to receive that information. Moved by Debbie or moved by Francis. All in favor? Could we see that all of the committee members please have their cameras on? Marcel, Mohammed, Uba.
We do.
Councillor Fletcher. They do?
Yeah.
I do. You can see me?
Okay. We can see you, and we can see everybody else as well.
Oh, that's peculiar. Okay, because I can only see Francis, Debbie, and Kelly. That's weird. Okay. All right. All right. So now we have a number of deputations. We have deputations on item 6, review of the charter, the tenant funds distribution policy and procedure. We have 3 deputations. We have a deputation on animal pest control and on the operational measures, the tenant refresh, tenant engagement refresh, and then the tenant's first update. Now, so we have to hold all of those items. The only item that is not held is the TCHC responses to the OACH biannual update. Is there anyone who would like to hold that item, or shall we move it and go to the rest of the agenda?
Move it.
All right. You want to hold it?
No.
No. Okay. So you'll move it?
Yes.
Move receipt. Okay. All in favor of item 7C? That's carried. And then now we go on to item 6. We have a deputation on the review of the charter.
So our deputant is Catherine Wilkinson. I believe that Ms. Wilkinson is on the line.
I am.
Okay. Okay. You have 5 minutes, please.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Good morning. But for a minute there, I thought I was on hold waiting at the call center. So welcome to our world. So I wanted to talk to a couple items on the charter. This is the ideal time to actually update it to include additional language that specifies the Tenant Services Committee is responsible not just for tenant engagement, but also for funding programs related to tenant engagement. Given the recent confusion around which committee is responsible for tenant engagement funding programs, This will ensure this does not happen again in the future. It is well known by tenants that the Tenant Services Committee has responsibility for operational matters relating to tenants. And once again, in an effort to improve the tenant communications and bridge the gap between this committee and the tenants and the board, I am recommending that Toronto Community Housing create an electronic email distribution list, which tenants can voluntarily sign up to receive emails in advance of all board and committee meetings and materials, so they are kept informed of what items are being discussed, and also give them an opportunity to depute if they choose to do so. This is a relatively easy task and can be done at no cost to Toronto Housing. The other item I wanted to touch on under the charter is the oversight of the Commissioner of Housing Equity. This role has changed recently, and I don't see that reflected, as the Commissioner of Housing Equity will now be reporting also to the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation in addition to this board. The charter should be revised to include that new relationship in addition to revising the terms of reference for this expanded role. Thank you for your consideration.
Any questions of the deputant? Okay.
I just have one question, and that just has to do with the, is there no way where people sign up and get information regularly from TCHC tenants, Catherine?
Or is that a question of the deputant, Councillor
I'm just,
Fletcher?
yes, I'm asking if she's aware of anything. That's my question to the deputant, Mr. Chair.
I suppose you could send an email requesting materials, but at the present time, tenants are better informed by City Council because we regularly receive those emails. We know what's being presented, but we have no idea what's going on at our board unless we go online, find the meeting, and look for the materials.
I'm just asking in general around things. Is there not something might go out monthly to all tenants that would include any board information, any other information that's coming from
Absolutely
TCHC?
nothing.
That's not a communication piece that exists yet. So that's just very interesting in updating our communications with tenants in that way. Something, anyway, thank you for that. And I think clarifying that if this funding is going to come under here, I think that's a good thing to do. Make sure that we're clear where it's coming from, because it was coming from here and also revitalization previously. Thank you. Under two different committees.
Thanks.
So I believe that the committee chair had to leave the meeting momentarily. It may be a technical issue and that he's trying to join. I can speak to the report for committee members who are part of the meeting while he's doing that. The report actually does not recommend at this point in time any changes to the Tenant Services Committee charter in terms of the relationship that the organization has with our Commissioner of Housing Equity. The relationship is governed by terms of reference between the board and the commissioner. We've had some conversation with the commissioner in light of the role she's being asked to assume in relation to Toronto Seniors Housing as to whether or not that change will give rise to changes in her terms of reference, and we can bring that forward to the board. In the event that we are would amend the Tenant Service Committee charter in order to provide that the Tenant Service Committee would have oversight over board programs funding tenant or providing tenant funds, I think we would need to coordinate that work with the Building Investment Finance and Audit Committee, who I believe has that responsibility at this time. And we can consider that change as we bring this matter forward to the board for its ultimate approval.
Actually, I'm interested. Thank you, Dara, but I'd like to make the change that Catherine has suggested so that we don't have any confusion. If there's funds going to tenants, they need to be streamlined through one portal and reported out in one way. And that hasn't, I don't think that's been the case up until now. There've been a few different places things have gone. There's been different things. And through the, I won't call it participatory budgeting, but through the tenant requests for things, that was going through, it didn't appear to be coming here. So am I right or wrong about that? I'm very unclear now after what Catherine said.
It's those matters have been considered through the Building Investment Finance and
Correct.
Audit Committee historically.
Correct. So I think that these matters need to be going through the tenant engagement, because anything dealing with tenants, I'm noticing Marcel is nodding his head, should be under the committee. That, I think that's out of their purview. It's just not something that they're going to be as engaged on, because they're looking at procurement, they're looking at all those things, but understanding how these things work and that they're working well, I think goes under this committee. So I'd like to make that change, or request you to look at that change and bring it to the board when we approve this. I'm sure we'll have to approve this at the board. This is a governance matter. Would it go to the board?
It would.
It would?
It would, yes.
Yes. So could I ask that when it comes to the board, that at least be recommended, because then the BIFAC chair will be there as well.
Sorry, I had some technical issues. I lost my connection. What is
We
the
know.
change?
We know you did.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's Bell, you know,
It's
fine.
the Etobicoke. You need better Wi-Fi out there.
Yeah, yeah. It's dial-up, right? Sorry, what
Call
was
the
the change?
premier. Isn't that where he comes from? Sorry.
He does. He's just up the road, actually, yeah. What was the change you're recommending?
I'm recommending what Catherine had mentioned, is that we have one portal for tenant-facing funds. If it's tenant-facing and not business-facing, that it would go through the Tenant Services Committee. So we wouldn't have funds for tenants streamed through different places. Be
Okay.
one stop oversight.
Okay, so Dara, you've made some sort of notation on that?
Yes, so I've amended the motion that is before the committee this morning to provide, if I can share it. That the rather than having the charter proceed to the board for approval without amendment, amended to reflect that the Tenant Services Committee would have oversight of TCHC programs governing the distribution of tenant funds. Now,
That's great, Darren. Thank
as
you.
I say, I believe that that change may require coordination with the BIFAC charter, but we can take that away and have a look at that and how that would work prior to the board meeting at which this would be considered.
Yes, I agree. Can't just take their role, but they did have oversight over other funding, and I think it's better done at Tenant Services.
Okay, all right, so we'll vote on that. All in favor? Fine with that. Okay, thank you. And the next item is the tenant funds distribution policy, which I hope, which is the second time we've received this, I believe. And we have 3 deputations.
And the first deputant is Ms. Wilkinson, who I believe is on the line.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to clarify, as someone who sat on this board for 10 years, that the tenant funds always went through the Tenant Services Committee. It was not a BIFAC oversight area. So, in speaking to the tenant funds, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, the funding application process versus the previous process, which was, as I indicated earlier, a 2-page funding form, and it was requested at a local council meeting with the TSC staff present, and it was voted on and approved with 4 tenant signatures by local tenant reps all on the same day. So that wipes out half your flow chart. Each council had a budget based on heads and beds for their council, split between tenant engagement and administrative needs. Approved items would be ordered and delivered with staff doing the necessary administrative tasks to comply with the company's financial requirements behind the scenes. From a tenant perspective, the council Their council was the decision maker. It was a streamlined process. It was transparent. It was efficient, and tenants were happy with the process, and it did not require a flow chart. The 23-page booklet application is too long. The process is burdensome and much less efficient than the old one, which now requires 8 tenant signatures. With only a $250,000 budget, clearly Toronto Community Housing has reduced the budgets for councils by centralizing this funding process. So let's consider their flow chart. The tenant rep gives the funding request form to the staff person when they see them. The staff person, TSC, sends it by inter-office mail to who's overseeing the funding table of tenants that meets once a month. The funding table reviews and, if approved, sends it along to the coordinator, who 2 weeks later sends an approval letter to the person who requested the funds. The coordinator confirms that there's vendor availability and requests the engagement manager to sign off and approve the order. The engagement manager approves, sends it back to the coordinator to place the order, and then the community awaits delivery. The CSC receives the items alongside the tenant in the community and signs the invoice. The funding tables were at all times intended to be interim. As per the application in your package, that is the language in there. And this was to ensure that funds continued to be available to tenants while the new tenant engagement model rolled out. It appears staff have decided these funding tables are now permanent. The flow chart gives no indication of timelines. Clearly, it will take much longer than the council model. This is a brand new policy exclusively for tenants. The shareholders' direction, I keep reminding you of this, requires Toronto Community Housing to consult with tenants on issues and policies that will have an impact on service standards or level of service. And that did not happen. If staff had held public consultations with tenants before creating this new policy, I believe the funding process before you would be a lot less complex. The fact that only 69 funding requests were approved in 2021 pretty much says it all. With or without board approval, this process is already in place and it serves staff well. The real question is, does it work for the tenants? Thank you.
Any questions of the executive?
Yes, I do. What kinds of things would be approved in the model that you're describing, please?
In the new model?
No, the previous.
Okay. In the previous model, anything that was needed in the local communities was presented by the reps at the council meeting that met once a month. And it could be a rake, it could be a picnic bench, it could be some training, it could be a community barbecue. Pretty much everything was confirmed at the local council level. There wasn't another process that had to be gone through to get approval for the items to flow.
And were there catalogs there where you could pick different things for the community, or these were initiated through tenant requests, not shopping in catalogs?
No, often tenants would identify exactly what they wanted and where it could be sourced. I think switching to a TCH approved vendors list only really impacted this process, because the vendors often charge 2-3 times more than you could get it locally.
And so the kinds of things, I understand that. So if there were problems in the past, you basically say, don't make tenants pay for any administrative problems that arose because of TCHC staff administration.
No, really beyond the local level, the council wasn't aware. They were aware there was an internal approval process and that their items would flow once that process happened. I think this is just overwhelming. It really truly is from a tenant perspective. I get that, the BIFAC would be all over this because it's quite detailed and lengthy, but I really think the lack of tenant input is not serving us well. And we know if you work with your tenants, we can find a compromise to make things work for both you and for your tenants.
I just want to ask another question, though, regarding the refresh, where the tenant councils previously had been in place for a while with tenant reps who'd been there. Have the tenant council started meeting with the new tenant representatives? That you know about?
Well, and I'm not a tenant rep, but I do know the councils have met virtually. So there has been, I guess, some dialogue with the councils.
So
Okay.
sorry, John.
Go ahead, carry on.
Sorry, did you say something?
No, go ahead. I thought you were, go ahead. If you questions of the deputy, carry on.
Yes, I do. So if you're making a suggestion, it would be to discuss it with, have a realistic conversation with the tenant councils, and I might add all former tenant reps and directors and current directors to really look and make sure from a oversight perspective, everything's good, and from a tenant perspective, what makes sense before we would finalize it, because I would have to agree with you that there is this is now being left up to the tenants. So thank you.
Well, I think in the bigger issue is, Councillor Fletcher, that this was local decision making. This has now been centralized and is approved once a month by a set of strangers that are tenants, and they'll decide whether or not you get your funding application. So you don't know once it goes into that process if you're going to get your items or not.
So it's okay.
And that was an important part of being a tenant rep. You were empowered to make decisions, and you had a budget, and you worked with that. Now, all of that has been stripped out of the role.
Oh, there was a budget. I see. Okay. A budget for each council?
Yes, and it was based on heads and beds, and each council was allotted so much money.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of the deputy? I have a question. To your knowledge, per basis. Catherine, are you still there? Catherine, are you still there?
Yeah, but I couldn't hear you. It was kind of garbled. I see you.
The question is, what was the budget previously on a per activity basis?
Okay, it wasn't so much limited per activity basis. That was a decision made by the council. So, you know, typically gardening, there was an agreement that at gardening season, each community could request $250. And so if there were 13 communities, anybody could put forward the request. And that was, you know, the council voted on that and agreed on that amount. But I think the budgets per se for the councils were around 10 to 12,000 for the councils to, you know, engage their communities. And then there was a smaller budget that was for administrative tasks such as training and supplies and those kinds of things. And they really learned how to budget, and you know, they also learned the importance of using it or losing it before the end of the year.
I see. Okay, thank you. All right, so thank you very much. Next deputy is Kathy Birch. Kathy, are you there?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Great. So I want to support what Catherine just deputed on, and I really want you to boil it down to, you know, when it came to gardening, this has been going on since this corporation's been formed, where tenants have supplied gardening, which saves this corporation thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in landscaping charges, and yet it's always difficult to get the approval in enough time for the normal May 2-4 weekend planting. But yet every year we go through this, and there was no process laid out or distributed out to our tenant reps, our building committees, or any of that stuff this year. And on top of it, they had trouble finding how to get the funding request forms in the first place, and then you find out that they're over 20 pages long. So my question to this committee is, are you going to start making your staff, every time they request a stapler or they need something in order to do their jobs, are you going to have them fill out a 20-plus page application for the funding, and that they're going to have to go around and get that many signatures from their colleagues before they can take it to their next superior level to get approval and in order to do their jobs. If you're not willing to do that, then why are you willing to do that to people who are volunteering their time and saving this corporation thousands and thousands of dollars? I'd like an answer to that.
Okay, is that are there any questions of the deputant from committee members?
How can you not, like, it's ridiculous, the work that you're putting on the tenants that are volunteering their time. It's actually quite shameful. Good way to kill engagement. Congratulations.
So Kathy, you feel that asking for 8 signatures is too much to ask?
You got to remember that people are taking their own time to go around to their neighbors and that. I mean, we got our 4 signatures previously at the previous councils. We had our fellow council members, you know, because they knew what the project was going to be, and because you had to tell them what it was going to be about, why you wanted the money, and then you got 4 signatures, and then it proceeded. Now it's 8 signatures, multiple layers of approvals, onerous paperwork in just the application form. And by the way, good luck on finding it on our website anywhere. Dig through those 10 layers in order to find it. I challenge anybody on this committee to easily find that tenant funding application form.
Oh, okay. Thank you. You've given. Uba has a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, as I was looking at the report, actually, it looks a bit complicated, to be frank with you. So I was wondering, is there a way to simplify the application to make it shorter so it's easier? And also to go back to Catherine's comment.
Sorry, Uba, is this a question for
Yeah,
the
yeah,
deputy?
yeah. It's alluding to a question with a question. So to go back to what Catherine was saying, is there a way also we can do more consultation with tenants so they feel it's for them, because it's kind of disturbing to hear that.
The corporation didn't do any consultation with previous tenant reps, current tenant reps. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, they weren't in place. That's right. For a couple of years. So therefore, it did. I don't know who came up with this form. I would suspect that it is one of the financial parts of this corporation that decided that. But it's the point that we're tenants. We're volunteering our time. Do you have to? You don't make it this hard for your staff to get things that they need to do their jobs. Our jobs as volunteers is to make sure that people are engaged, and yet you want to make it brutal for us to get the tools that we need to have the communities engage and make them safer. Why is that? Please streamline this application process, make it more readily available so that people can actually do the work that they want to do and that they want to be with their neighbors.
Thank you. Actually, my question, sorry, maybe I didn't articulate what I was saying. Maybe I didn't articulate it. My question, actually, part of it was going to Jack and Nadia. Is there a way we can simplify
Uba, if you've got questions of staff, that comes after the deputations. Okay? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I don't know what's happening, but somebody has their mic on and there's a lot of noise.
They have a show on, a TV show or radio
Yeah, I
show
know.
in the background.
Hearing it or not, but it's
Sorry,
I can-
loud.
Sorry, committee members, I believe actually that the background noise is part of you're hearing background noise that is in the environment from which Ms. Birch is making her deputation, unfortunately.
Okay, all right, so she's finished, and now we have Mr. Bill Lohman. Mr. Bill, are you there?
I am.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sharma, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this subject this morning. I agree with both Catherines, and as a senior, it has been a particular problem all through this process. And once was a two-page process for tenants seeking the funding for all manner of engagement ideas and activities has turned into, as stated, a 20-page booklet, a 12-page application that is assessed and qualified for its perceived value and alignment with the community's action plans. And it's interesting to note that these community action plan categories for communities, ideas, and input are the same as Toronto Housing Strategic's priorities, which basically means that the tenant action funding is predicated on corporate priorities and is judged on advancing those agendas. When you look at the process map that was mentioned earlier, I read through it, and what I found out is that there are 14 different steps that go back and forth through 7 sets of hands to make one decision. Tell me that is not simplifying a process. Where is the transparency and accountability to tenants in the assessment process of the decision makers? You know, tenants are not notified about their tenant action fund requests and are given no means to find out the status of their applications. The lack of staff communication regarding the approval process builds high anxiety and frustration in the community, as was stated earlier. You know, and most tenants and communities, they don't care who's supplying the funds. They only care about realizing that expectation that, you know, that's raised. You know, in this process of collecting all the different, you know, signatures. And so it raises an expectation, a tenant expectation that gets forced. And it forces a hardship on tenant leaders to deliver on these things, whether it gets approved or not, because it takes so long to hear back. And if I'm not mistaken, Toronto Housing's legal department has stated that tenant leaders should not face a hardship in delivering programs that benefit their communities. And I mean, I can talk about the old model where I've had to chase down my CSC to account for the funds and receipts so I could reconcile my account to the tenant council where I got the funding from. I've had a CSC who borrowed $761.40 from our community account to cover his promised expense, and it has never been returned. And in this area, the 2018 and 19 PV problems that were raised by senior tenants because of items that were never delivered and has never been addressed. And it has been raised numerous times. And we have not heard anything from the investigators who have been reviewing the PB process. And we still have senior communities who have not received their PB items from 2019. You know, in regards to the policy itself, the one thing that's true, whether it's the old policy or whether it's this new massive policy, which is streamlined to be centrally focused and is really out of line with the whole process of decentralization. And a policy is only as good as the adherence to it. And when there is no accountability, you have what you have. Thank you very much.
Other questions of the deputant? I have a question. Bill, you still there?
Yes, I am.
So these forms, the forms that are required to be filled out, I mean, there's a lot of space on these forms, and there's some questions and some boxes to check off and so on and so forth as a part of the, part of the process. Is there something in particular that you object to? In what staff is asking in order for an application to be approved? We've heard previously that that having 8 tenants sign is somewhat onerous and causes a little bit of problem. But in terms of what staff has suggested we ask for before the funds are approved, is there anything in particular that you object to?
Yes. I think one thing that is that tenants find difficult are there's almost essay questions about justifying the reason for the request for the funding. I think some of the expectations about how those funds are supposed to be used is a bit narrow. That there are other things, and that have been that tenants need that are maybe not in line with the very focused objective that this policy is putting out in terms of how those funds can be used or what they can be used for. So I think there needs further conversation about that. And when it comes to seniors, in particular, as this process has been going through, we have had very little conversation and very little communication about the status of this or about our ability to even be able to be part of the process. I think if there are many communities who still, because not everybody is computer savvy, and because our new senior service coordinators are trained in back focused, in back of the house efforts and not front facing efforts, they are not up to date on the Tenant Action Fund policy. And so with so little communication and with so little understanding of what this process is, and with seniors not necessarily having computer access, it is prohibitive to our communities.
Okay. All right, I get the message. Okay, thank you very much for your deputation.
I have a question. I've got a question. Thank you. It's really this tenant services and tenants here to talk to us about important tenant matters. I think it's great. That's why we have this committee. Bill.
Yes.
Are you on the stack? I think you are, right?
Yes, I am.
Has the stack ever had a discussion about this important matter?
We have not.
Okay.
It's an item that that was raised last year, and it was just it was mentioned along with the
I'm just discerning that you've never had some input into having an actual discussion as the stack, as senior tenants. So confirming that.
No, we have not. We have not.
And kind of as a stakeholder group to get your opinion on this rollout and if it works. So that's important to hear. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and seeing no further questions from members of the committee, we'll now turn it over to questions of staff from the committee members. Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, and maybe staff can comment on the concerns of the deputants and really explain the process. It seems like it's very confusing, the process. If you can just update the committee, because it seems like there's a lot of confusion on how the funds could be used and any updates, communication.
Through the chair, I can start and ask Nadia to add. But the process that's there before you is intended not to be the long-term solution. It was what was put in place in order to create a mechanism to be able to provide funds, given that we still have work to do for the, my apologies on the report, the process controls report that we are still working on. And I think the concerns that are being mentioned are absolutely valid and would be part of a future engagement opportunity to look at the process. But given that we have not concluded on the report with respect to participatory budgeting and all, this was intended to be an interim mechanism to allow funds to be accessible.
Anything further, Councilor Nunziata?
Nadia, did you want to elaborate on that?
Thank you. So through the chair, Councilor Nunziata, the team had put together this plan with input from tenant forums that happened in 2018. And we also had an election committee that tenants were on that approved it. So again, this was an interim process that was put in place while we were going through the tenant engagement refresh. We were having discussions in terms of putting a system in place, future state, that would decentralize the funding through the hub model. But we were, again, wanting to ensure that we had the financial accountabilities and compliance measures in place while we were doing that. So all of the deputation's comments and amendments are something that we're happy to revisit, and the application process as well, to see if we can simplify it in any way future state.
Thank you.
Councilor Fletcher, and then Debbie Douglas.
Yeah, I am going to refer this to STAC and tenant deputants, tenant council meetings, and current and former tenant directors. And I think as an interim, it is just far too onerous. I'm looking at the eligible, so having one stream is important. I want to know if the eligible expenses, page 102, page 9 of the booklet, items you can get, kitchen and household items. What is that?
Really?
Kitchen and household items.
Eligible and ineligible. Eligible expenses. Kitchen, household items. I'm unclear what that would be.
So through the chair, Councilor Fletcher, Julio, I don't know if you can comment on that. So we have Julio Rigores, who's the manager of tenant engagement, around the kitchen and household items.
Good morning, and to the chair. Thank you for the question, Councilor Fletcher. This speaks to some of the programs that we ran in communities, like breakfast programs, where they're required to buy utensils to hold for kitchen items. That's what that's referring to.
Okay, so barbecues, treadmills, where are those? Are we removing those for now?
We're definitely considering review the eligibility criteria to accommodate the requests that have been coming to the applicants and to the board.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. I don't see, there was a whole spate of things out of catalogs, barbecues, treadmills, different things of that kind. I don't see them here. Are we removing those for now until we sort this out, or are they eligible, or are they ineligible at the moment?
So Councilor Fletcher, perhaps I can respond to that. The catalog that you're referring to and the items that you're mentioning were covered under the participatory budgeting program. That program is on hold. The Tenant Action Fund was always a parallel system to participatory budgeting, and it was intended to fund smaller community tenant-led events. So
right.
they
So, okay, thank you.
Items.
Thank you. So in other words, when you want to have your barbecue at Rivertown, you go to the tenant council and you get some funds. When you want to have the Christmas dinner at 1275 Danforth, you go to the tenant council, they agree. So that was a system that I don't believe was broken. It was a tenant council system with approvals, And if anything's missing, it's actually a sheet of paper that everybody signs off, but apparently we have that in order to get the funds. Everybody has to vote. So I'm unsure why, when the problem is in participatory budgeting, that we're now layering on this big process for basically a hose in order to water the garden. I'm having a very hard time with that.
So Councillor Fletcher, perhaps I can respond to that, and hopefully I can address the questions. So we did have the tenant council funds originally in place when we undertook the tenant engagement refresh, and we were looking at an alternate model. The tenant councils are no longer in place. There will be regional council tables that are I think will be established by July. So the focus is to get those up and running. So we created a centralized structure to ensure that tenants still had access to funds. And we wanted to make sure that tenants were involved in the decision-making related to where those funds went. So that's why there was a transition, because the tenant councils were no longer in place.
So we don't have tenant councils anymore. It's taken me 3 years to find out that they're gone.
So under the new system, we have tenant elected reps. We also have building committee members that will participate in regional tables.
Yeah, so I think we're going to be reviewing that in general, because this is for somebody to have a barbecue this summer. I think that there's an awful lot of paperwork to have a barbecue. So we're going to be, and staff are going to have to help everybody. And I just find that this is very staff heavy in onerous. It needs to be simpler. If you have an event, we have all kinds of people in place. We have general managers, we have assistant general managers, we have superintendents, we have a whole system. And we have folks that work with tenants in the community tenant service coordinators. Why wouldn't we just do that while we're figuring this out? So if you want to have a barbecue, you want to buy something for the kitchen, you want to get a hose, you need to get transit, you need to pay for a permit. That should just be a simple function, because it's not going to be that much money. It's maybe you want to have your barbecue, $500. That's what everybody got for a barbecue in the past. So I just think we are adding on layers and layers here in trying to solve a problem. And I think we're creating a problem. So I just like to look at, can we not find a way? Marcel, are you nodding your head? Or thank you. That I appreciate the care and attention and the thoughtfulness, that it's important to have a system that is workable and accountable. But this doesn't necessarily make it accountable. I think it's just going to upset a lot of people. Every staff member knows where all the gardens are. They know where all the barbecues have happened every year. They know where all the meals happen at Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving. They know a lot of things. So it should be simplified, really, until we get this sorted out. And we took away a whole system that had worked for years. I think we should be very careful. If our problem was participatory budgeting, let's fix that. But let's not have tenants so upset with us that they feel like they can't just have their barbecue this summer with everybody coming out of COVID. I'm a little worried about that, but I'd like to hear what the tenant directors think. That's why they're
here. Any other comments or Marcel?
Yeah, I agree with 100% with Councillor Fletcher. And I just want to add to just the amount of time it takes through the process. Like if you want to do something for the summer, by the time the process is actually done, you're exiting summertime, right? So if I put in for something now, I won't know until mid-July if we got it or not, at the way it's set up, my understanding. But I do agree with Councillor Fletcher. Thanks.
Uba?
Just to reiterate what the council and Marcel said, it should be very simple, and I believe system was working pretty much, and that's what I was saying earlier. Thank you.
Right, so any other comments or questions? So Nadia, am I missing something here? I don't know if everybody's read the process in detail, because the process, I mean, if I'm looking at it, the step one is you connect with the team. You send an email, or you call, you submit the form, whatever it is you want to do. And then, the community, the funds group will get back to you, they will review it, and then they will get back to you. And they'll let you know, and this is all done within 30 days. I mean, having heard what you've heard today, how could you streamline this process? How do you feel you could streamline the process without taking out, taking out the checks and balances that are of course required? Because the process, I mean, this document is written, I mean, it's color, it's large font, there are whole pages with just, that are almost blank, where you're to write something in some sort of descriptor. I think it was written to be easily digested, but for some reason, people are having trouble, with it.
So Chair Campbell, I'm happy to respond to that. We did have discussions around potentially looking at simplifying or modifying and getting tenant input in that process. We wanted to have this discussion today before we did that. We didn't want to change the document between the board and today's discussion. And so that's something that we can take away. We also discussed removing the booklet from the actual application. So simplifying the application itself, but having the clearly outlined steps as a separate attachment and document so that tenants can reference it. I think it's a bit confusing for some that it's together. And so there's the impression that it's a 20-page application, when really, to your point, I think the application has spaces for tenants to hand right into it. So I think we can look at, are there other pieces that we can potentially complete or have done on a checklist so that it's easier for tenants. So that's absolutely something that I think we can take away. In terms of the financial controls and measures that we've put in place, which includes the staff oversight and the layers that we've identified, I can take that away with Roseanne Lee, our CFO, and have that discussion with finance to see if there's any steps and procedures that are put in place that we could potentially simplify or expedite.
Okay, and then in regard to response rates, I mean, it's to be dealt with generally, it's the application is submitted and it's going to be dealt with within a month. All right, so I mean, if I was submitting one today, I would have a response by, July the 8th.
So Chair Campbell, I think the tenants are referring to the previous tenant council model where decisions happened more expeditiously. Right now, it takes approximately 30 days from submission to application approval. There has been a delay this year because we had to set up the system, train the staff, get them up to date with all of the new compliance measures. And so I'd say moving forward, it's 30 days. I think so far this year, we've been slower than that because we haven't initiated dispersing the funds yet.
Okay, all right. Okay, so
Back up again.
okay, and so you're looking for approval today of this policy and the procedure, but you've just indicated that having heard what you've heard, you want to go back and re-examine things. Is that correct?
So maybe Derek can clarify. So we have approval in principle from the board because we didn't want to stop allowing tenants to access funds now. So we're recognizing that there's some streamlining and maybe simplifying of the system we could do, but what we don't want is to not have a mechanism for tenants to access funds currently. And so I don't know if we can get to a place where we can look to make the amendments and review the current system without penalizing tenants that are in the process of getting funds currently.
Yeah, I mean, because you don't want to we don't want to get caught up in a bureaucratic boondoggle where nothing gets done because we can't decide on crossing all of the T's and dotting the I's the way everybody wants. So, okay, Councillor Fletcher.
I just have to say that crossing the I's and dotting the T's the way everybody wants. I think we're hearing from tenants, there's too many I's and there's too many T's. That's pretty clear to me. And there's $250,000. This isn't $5 million.
No, but all I was saying is that we shouldn't
I'm
hold
sorry.
up the flow, right?
Well, I think we should interrupt the flow and make it simpler. That's what I think. And that would be my motion here. Because I don't want tenants who are coming out of COVID to then all of a sudden have a lot of negative feedback. You know, if that's what we're hearing from tenants and tenant deputations, then you can imagine what they're saying out there. There's $250,000. There's 3 regions and 1 set of seniors. When you divide that up, we're just talking about $60,000 per area, or maybe a little more. And so everybody knows where the barbecues have taken place. Everybody knows who has a garden. Everybody knows we have staff that work with tenants. It's beyond me to see this huge process that if any tenants see this, and they have to come to speak to us today, they're just thinking, what are you doing? Keep it simple.
All right.
The
So from a,
problem's at our end, not at their end. The reconciliation is not at the tenant side, it's at the staff side.
all right.
And this
So
kind of
more,
puts the onus on the tenants. So I'm
more,
trying to be as nice as I can with you, Mr. Chair, but I'm pretty clear that I'm not going to vote for this here today, maybe in principle, and make it tenant friendly. And also I sent you a motion, Dara, consult with the staff, consult with the tenant councils, consult with the tenant directors, find something where everybody understands it's about financial accountability and making sure that works, but not about having tenants feel just overwhelmed and that they have to have a BA in order to make an application. They're already angry enough about the tenant council's gone, the tenant rep's gone, the funding taken away. They're already upset. I don't want to upset people more. I don't think that's my job.
all right.
I think
So
my job is to flag when that's going to happen. I think it's your job too.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think Uba had, at the beginning of the conversation, had suggested that that staff come up with a simplified version of having the request and then the response in a more timely manner, while not stopping the funds. So if Dara can come up with a motion that those 2 things can work together, then we can move along. I'm also paying attention to time.
all right, so the thing is that this has been approved by the board. This was here for information. So in reaction to this being received from information, the committee seems to want to make a motion that the staff go back and review the procedures, because I think it was the procedures that we heard specifically about being complicated. So I think, is that what I'm hearing from you, that the staff needs to go back and review the procedures of the procedures of the process?
Yes, the staff need to go back and simplify the process
Okay.
while continuing to
All right.
allocate the funds.
And run it by a few tenants while you're in the process of doing that.
Yes,
That's the other suggestion.
that was Uba's recommendation.
And
And Dara, what do you have with all of that?
So I would, I think, Mr. Chair, your comment with respect to the nature of the matter that's before the committee is correct. The board has in principle approved and staff have implemented the process for 2022. So there would be risk created for the organization if we try to vary from the board approved process midstream. But in light of the comments from the deputants and committee members, as I understand the direction from the committee is to engage a tenant consultation process, including engaging members of the staff, tenant deputants, tenant elected representatives, and current former tenant directors, report back on the outcome of that consultation process with the aim of simplifying the application process while ensuring that financial and procedural controls are appropriately addressed. What that will mean is that staff will go away, talk to tenants, try and simplify the process and report back, while at the same time administering the process that the board has approved.
Sorry, Derek, question. Did the board approve exactly everything we're looking at here? Every single piece of paper?
The board
Or did we approve the process?
The board approved in principle the process. The concern that was addressed at the board was that if the board didn't do that, there would be no mechanism through which staff could distribute any money to tenants this year.
I got
And
it.
so
So
staff
we
are
approved the
following that process.
Thank you. This is the process and this is how they would like to implement it. I appreciate that. I think I'd like to amend that staff create a simpler process and then for the longer term process, figure out what that is with that group of tenants. So there has to be a consultation with tenants around processes that touch tenants. And I'm not sure that happened. In fact, I'm pretty sure it didn't.
She
So
said that
that's-
it did happen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, with some of the tenant council people. That's right. I'm sorry. My apologies. You're right, John. Anyway, I just think our message out is thank you. We're working on it. Please find a simpler way to do it without having to go through a million hoops. You can show people, then later on engage in a process set up the process. Anybody else you want to add there for this and for participatory budgeting so that we get back in the business of doing all the things we want to do and everybody understands it's about financial accountability, which I understand that is extremely important, but it's also about making sure people can access what they've been waiting for a while.
All right, so we have the motion again, and do you want to put that up again?
Yes.
So I think the change for me, Dara, is not that you can't simplify it before you do that. Just start your simplification and then check with a few people and then have a longer process. Do you understand what I'm saying? Direct staff to simplify the application process and get feedback. This should not take a long time.
The motion says, with the aim of simplifying the application process. That's what it does address that.
Yes, but it only happens after the consultation.
That's what it says.
I understand that, John.
Counselor,
That's what I'm saying.
It's got the intent of your, that you want is in the motion. It says to engage in the consultation process with the aim of simplifying the process.
And I'm saying direct staff to simplify the process, including a tenant consultation, engagement of staff, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not waiting 2 months or a month to get everybody together to talk about it. Make it simple. And then also along the way, where you can, do that. And then I'm sure we'll be talking about this again.
Yeah, okay.
That's my point.
All right.
Mr. Chair.
This will need to go back to the board. The board
That's
has
fine.
approved a process.
They
So
approved
staff,
it in principle.
so staff can develop a simplified process with the intent of bringing that to a board meeting for approval.
I'm sorry, Dara. I'm going to ask you, since we approved in principle, I ask you, do we approve in principle every form that's in front of us today? Or do we approve in principle a process to have a clear application with a reconciliation?
The board approved in principle the process that was established. I understand then the motion to be authorizing staff to adopt a simplified process rather than engage in a consultation process that would result in a report back on what that procedure would look like.
I think that you've captured that. Go and make it simple and then bring whatever you've made simple back. Because when I adopt something in principle, that means I agree we're going to have an application process and there's going to be a reconciliation process and everything else. But I didn't agree to every single piece of paper here. So I think we're clear. We're agreeing that there's going to be a process for these funds. We've agreed, the board has agreed. The feedback from your committee is that it's too complicated. So simplify it. And when you're going to do all these things, anyway, let's just get to that and it'll be great.
Okay.
If I may, through the chair.
Yep.
Our acting COO had shared some information regarding there may be some applications that are in process with the current as
That's
the
fine.
process been and so in theory some parallel activity so that we don't disrespect the current applications and we look at the process to simplify as well.
Thank you. And to direct a request that all of the tenant-facing staff assist the tenants with this new process, because
Yes.
that would be quite important that they're on top of it and that it's simplified.
Okay, Dara, can we have that motion up so we can have it voted on?
I think I understand it to be this then. Authorize staff to engage in a consultation process and to implement a simplified application process while ensuring that financial and procedural controls are appropriately addressed.
That seems to get the gist of the discussion.
I think that's perfect because we've approved it, but that's what we want. Thank you very much.
Okay, that motion moved, or we'll have it moved by Councillor Fletcher. All in favor? All right,
I'd like a recorded vote.
a recorded vote, a
You
recorded
got that
vote,
right.
recorded vote. All in favor?
Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher, Member Douglas, Councillor Nunziata, Member Charlebois, Member Hawk, and Member Farah. Member
Thank you,
Campbell.
Chair. And yourself?
Yes, Councillor, or Chair Campbell, right, got it, okay.
Don't forget yourself now.
Now I got myself, okay, so that's fine, now we can move on to item 7B, and in the interest of time, which is now 11:30, because of our half-hour late start time, we'll hopefully, I recognize that was quite important. We now have a deputation on the pest control, and this is
Ms. Wilkinson.
Miss Wilkinson, okay. Miss Wilkinson, are you there?
I am.
We are on item 7B, if you'd like to make your deputation, please.
Okay, thank you. And I bet I'm probably the only one disputing on this issue, but I'm very passionate about it. You know, bed bugs continue to be the #1 pest issue facing tenants in our communities, and I'm surprised that Toronto Housing is not discussing it more frequently. For those of you who are not aware, I actually had the privilege of serving on a Toronto Public Health Committee for 2 years to study the issue of managing bed bugs in the city of Toronto. And I was also the co-writer of a report that went to the Toronto Board of Health where it was approved and adopted. And through that process, I learned ways tenants could use to minimize the risk and how to manage an infestation, and how landlords could better assist them. And I was actually quite proud of the Toronto Community Housing Pest Management Strategy. TCHC will never have a complete resolution to pest control, but neither will any other landlord. These structural pests are brought into buildings and spend 90% of their time in hiding. It is almost impossible to achieve complete eradication. Well, we can provide treatments to reduce pests or eliminate them in one unit. We cannot change the human behavior of other tenants where there is excess clutter and hoarding, and ultimately that holds Toronto Housing back from receiving and achieving better results. Our pest management strategy included the provision of plastic mattress covers, garbage bags, and clear bags to encourage tenants to reduce the clutter, and safely store their clothing after doing laundry, and to temporarily pack their unit belongings during the treatment period. A plastic mattress cover costs less than $5, which site staff can order in varying sizes by the roll. The challenge is not all superintendents keep a supply of the mattress covers on site, while others refuse to give them to tenants. This was further complicated by the inability to source a regular supplier. So these are some of the tools that the landlord can readily provide at no cost to tenants when they report a bed bug infestation to encourage them to declutter and prepare for treatment. As the first point of contact is usually the site staff, refresher training, including pest inspection as part of the annual unit inspection, would help them to identify issues earlier and support their tenants to navigate through the treatment process. Unit turnover, scope of work, should include caulking of all baseboards to reduce spread between units. I do feel as a landlord, you could expand your tenant education strategy to educate tenants beyond high needs buildings about bed bugs. The emotional, financial, physical, and psychological toll on tenants is devastating, and it can be life-changing. There is still much stigma attached to having bed bugs, and as a landlord, you need to continue to find ways to talk openly about this issue to encourage tenants to report pests. Please consider creation of a permanent poster that tells tenants the importance of reporting pests, any pests, in a timely manner, and the support you will provide as a landlord to assist them to prepare for treatments. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions of the deputant? Okay, seeing none. Questions of staff?
Yep.
Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, page 132 here, table pest demand, pest treatment. I'm just looking at this. For bed bugs, it looks to me like 60% of the treatments are in the seniors portfolio. For cockroaches, 52% in the seniors portfolio. For mice, it's lower. Mice is 11%. So I would like to move that this gets sent to the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, Mr. Chair. I don't know if it has to go to our board first. Dara, does it have to go through the board?
No, I believe it can, that we can take direction from the committee and forward it to the governance staff at Seniors Housing.
Because we have got that broken down by, and ask them to share it with the board. That would not just to have it for themselves, but it is, of all of the, that's what really jumps out to me. I'm quite shocked. So I guess I'll ask them, well, we've had a seniors division. What steps were taken in particular, because there's only 14,000 tenants in 83 buildings, to focus on bed bugs and look at the assistance, et cetera, that seniors need.
Anything further?
No, that was a question.
Oh.
So through the chair, I can't, Jack, I don't know if you have any commentary on the senior specific area, because again, they didn't necessarily report up to operations in the last, certainly when this report was provided. So I wouldn't have to
see. Okay, so that they're gone, but I think that this is important. I think you'd agree that everybody sees this, but I'm a little concerned that there was 60% bed bugs in that portfolio, section of the portfolio. And always I ask for things, and I'll just reiterate that when we get reports that we, yes, that's great. We do have the seniors there, and they're not broken out over the other totals, but we won't need to have them anymore because they're gone.
And I can advise just on that point, Councillor, I understand that a copy of the report information has been shared with staff from Toronto Seniors Corporation, but we can send it to the board as well if you want.
Well, yes, because they might not get it. So
yep.
I think that's an important factor. And then the other thing is, I just wonder for what I don't want to talk about bed bugs for too long, but we don't have these reports all the time, but the actual kind of sealing the units is very important. And I'm not sure that that's a step that we take. So could I just ask that the Toronto Board of Health report on bed bugs be, if we don't have that our new administration has that report, because this is an ongoing issue, particularly for people that don't have an ability to pair their unit. Anyway, I think you all know, but.
Through the chair, if I may comment, I've already sent an email to Nadia. We'll coordinate with Ms. Wilkinson to locate not only that report, but some of her feedback that she's provided today.
Yes, Ms. Wilkinson has gone to people's apartments and put diatomaceous earth in their electrical plugs, because that means the bed bugs can't go from one unit to the other. There's very easy peasy things to do, but the bed bug companies actually don't want that, because they get a lot of money from three standard treatments. And then if it doesn't get fixed, another 3 standard treatments. So I'm a little disappointed that since you've left, Ms. Wilkinson, that this has seemed to languish a little bit.
What kind of earth was that?
Diatomaceous earth. I happen to know way too much about bed bugs, Chair. I
Ah.
chaired a committee in public health for years.
Okay, Councillor Nunziata, you had some questions?
Yeah, just a question. So pest control has always been an issue in our buildings, but just a question to staff. At one point, I was told in some of my buildings where we've had, issues, is that sometimes you have tenants that won't allow access into their unit, to treat their units. So are we still having that issue? Like, do we have a lot of tenants that are refusing that?
So through the chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Nunziata. I have Richard Grosh here, who's Senior Director of Business Operations, and I'll have him answer that question.
Good morning. Through the chair, yes, compliance is a major factor to our own ongoing work around pest control. So we do provide regular notice of entry. We do meet the obligations under Residential Tenancies Act, and where compliance does become an issue and we can attribute it to migration to adjoining units, we do issue warning letters up to and including an N7 or support from the landlord-tenant board.
Okay, so then we're able to access these units if you give them a warning letter, correct?
Correct. If we aren't able to gain access, we issue a warning letter, and then it would be followed by legal notices should it continue.
Do we have a percentage, an updated percentage on how many tenants are in that category, that receiving the notice and that's refusing entrance to their unit? Do we have that?
We would be able to extract it.
If you don't have it now, but I mean, because this seems like I've always had that issue in my building, so I'm just wondering if it's, if we still, if it's, if the numbers are climbing rather than we're reducing the number of complaints. Okay.
Sure, we would be able to extract that information. I don't have it available, but we would be able to.
Okay, thank you. And would you be able to break that down in buildings?
We do generally break it down by building and provide it to the regions for their follow-up. Maybe different engagement or other activities.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions of staff from committee members? No? All right, so a motion to receive the report for information. Moved by Councillor Nunziata. All in favor? Okay, that's received. And the next item is the TCHC's operational performance measures.
And Mr. Chair, we've, I think, attempted on 3 occasions to contact Mr. Avila Velarde, who indicated he wanted to, but he appears to be unavailable at this point in time.
Okay.
So our deputant on that matter is Ms. Wilkinson.
Okay, Catherine, are you there?
Oh, yes, I feel like I should have just sat at the table.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a couple items I wanted to speak to on this item. One of them is related to calls to the call center. More recently, there have been longer wait times at the call center. And, this could also result in dropped calls for service. So I'm not sure if this is due to technical or perhaps even staffing issues. So that is a concern. And Toronto Housing continues to throw everything at the call center. So if we have a new project, we're doing lighting, we're doing this, got questions, call the call center. And I don't know how the agents at the call center keep up with the call volume when the nature of their work and the calls keep changing. Administrative calls should be answered by administrative staff. It may be time to reconsider the function of the call center as it was originally intended for service and maintenance calls, period. Tenants just want timely service response. And I'm going to give you a couple of tenant lived experience. So I loathe to do this. It speaks to, how things are channeled through the call center and how things work in our communities. So with the recent fire alarm testing, we had technicians on site testing the emergency lighting. And on the Friday evening after the tech left, there was an entire stairwell without lights in the building. So I called the call center to report it, and after a 30-minute wait, the agent said they would send a work order to site staff. So that actually meant the entire stairwell would be in darkness for 72 hours. I suggested it was probably just a breaker that needed to be turned back on, I also suggested that in the event of a fire or other emergency and tenants had to exit the building, they may get injured or trapped in that dark stairwell. The call center agent advised he would send someone out to repair it. The lights were restored that night. But I think it's really important and a learning opportunity for the call center, and also with tenants reporting lights out, that they be specific. Is it one light? Is it an area of the building? Is it a stairwell? Because if this is reported to the call center and the landlord does not respond and there is an emergency, the landlord could be liable for not responding. So I'm just putting that out there. There was another issue regarding 2 accessible ground floor doors, again at my building. It was broken, and it was broken for well over a month. Now, the site staff called for service, so they did their job. Signage was posted that service has been called. That's an important piece. And the signage also directed tenants to use another door. This is one of 2 accessible doors for the building. It created an inconvenience for tenants, yes, but particularly for those with disabilities, as the door was closest to the elevator. The overarching issue is, in the event of a fire, tenants could not exit the building through this door. From a fire code lens, how long is it okay to trap your tenants in a building in the event of an emergency? The answer, I hope, is never. In the instance where had there been a fire or other emergency, the tenants could not get out of the building through this door. There needs to be clear service delivery expectations for vendors on repairs to broken doors, particularly if it prevents tenants or staff from exiting from a building. Tenants in this situation were at the mercy of the vendor and that's his convenience, and that shouldn't have happened. The last item I wanted to touch on was a senior had a flooding incident due to her toilet in her unit, and her next door neighbor called for service for her. She was on hold for 3 hours. She decided to call the fire department on another phone, and they arrived within 5 minutes, shut off the tap, and cleaned up the unit. Not all tenants know how to shut off the water below their toilet, and quite frankly, many are physically incapable of doing so. So the story doesn't end there. The 80-year-old tenant, who has mobility issues and walks with the assistance of 2 canes, was left without a toilet until the Monday. During this time, she would have to take the elevator down to the main floor and use a public washroom even in the middle of the night. Toronto Housing has on-call emergency plumbers. More could have been done for this tenant other than just turning off the tap. We should have had an alternative solution in place. And that was actually a senior in a senior's building, but it could also have been a senior in a family building. The other item I wanted to talk about was the
Catherine, your time is out.
arrears.
Catherine, I'm afraid your time is up.
The whole 5 minutes?
I'm afraid so.
Okay, can you just let me just rush through this last piece?
If you can go very quickly, I can give you another minute.
Okay, thank you. Well, I gave you 30 minutes of my life waiting for you to start the meeting, so that seems reasonable. I know management have worked for years to create strategies to reduce arrears. It is astounding that arrears are now sitting at 25.3 million, up 7 million versus 2021. But in the February Tenant Services Committee report, they were sitting at 20.5 million. And this suggests a $5 million increase in 6 months. At this rate, it is very concerning where they will be at year end. The board was told the old IT system would not allow it to separate rent from parking arrears, but the new system would be able to do that. Clearly, the amount of parking arrears in this 25 million will be a very small portion. So perhaps management will split that out in a future report. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of the deputy? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Catherine. And on the report, do we have questions of staff on the contents of the report?
Sorry, just before, I understand we've been trying through Ms. Wilkinson's deputation to reconnect with Mr. Avila Velarde. Is he on the line? Sorry.
Okay, well, if we connect with him, well, let's have questions of staff, and we can connect with him, he can come back on. Councillor Nunziata.
Yeah, just on that rent and parking arrears, what is the breakdown of the parking arrears? Do we know? Because you have it combined.
Through the chair, Councillor Nunziata, I'll have to get that information to you because we usually have it as a combined report, but I can separate that out.
So the parking arrears are tenant parking, not in some of these buildings where we have paid parking for visitors.
It would be tenant parking, but I'll get that information to you. The visitor parking is covered, I believe, under commercial, so it would be captured somewhere else, but I'll find out for you.
And the elevator service requests that has gone up as well. So are these elevators that completely break down? Like, is it a problem with maybe the contractor that's repairing these elevators? Because I get a lot of calls with elevators that are down. It takes weeks for them to repair it. So if you can just maybe clarify that for me, please.
Yes, Councillor Nunziata, thank you for the question. So approximately 50% of the calls require the elevators to be shut down entirely. The rest of the calls would just be items that we could repair while the elevator is still in service. So I can get more information. I also believe that a significant majority of the elevators that required calls this year were related to elevators that were slated for investment and refurbishment and updates. And so I can also provide that updated in the next report. So a lot of these are elevators that we already have on task to update. So they're just items that we're sort of catching up with and ensuring that we're providing service as they come. But over 50, like I said, sorry, approximately 50% require the elevator to be shut down in its entirety.
Right.
Repairs being done.
So just a question, I know some buildings where the same buildings where we have the elevator shut down and, it happens often. So just a question, is it the same contractor that's coming to repair these elevators? They're not repairing them and then they keep breaking down, or like, do you know that? No?
So Councillor Nunziata, I don't have that information. I can find out from staff and get back to you. I suspect we have different contractors, but I can't confirm that at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Okay, I've got a question, Nadia. The deputant referenced the call center. Do we have the same number of people staffing the call center as we have in the past?
So thank you, Chair Campbell, for the question. I don't believe we've changed the staffing levels. I'll ask Richard Grosch, Director, to comment on that. I will say we've had some technical issues over the last month or two, so I don't know when the incidents in reference took place, but we have had some technical issues that created significant delays for callers, and so we did address that, and so we're hoping to get back to our service levels, but there were a few occasions where we weren't able to meet service levels. So Richard, I don't know if you can comment on the staffing level component.
Through the chair, I can confirm it is the same staffing level, so we're at full staffing level currently.
So we're at full staffing level, and do we track the wait times for people when they're calling in? You know, there's one thing I hate hearing. It's when I call somebody like Bell Canada or Air Canada and they say, oh, we're experiencing a high volume of calls. Well, if you're experiencing a high volume of calls, hire some more people, right? But so I just was wondering, how do we approach it? Or do we have enough people there so that people aren't pulling their hair out and waiting, hours on end?
So I can confirm we do track the service wait time on the calls. I can confirm that those call times have gone up with the recent launch of the Homes 2B. It is a new system. The call times as well have increased, and we're currently reviewing that to determine next steps.
Okay, all right. Because I mean, we are in the tenant servicing business. We don't want to have people, we want to be able to service people properly, and so that would be a concern to me. Then we talk about one of the things that keeps coming up is in regard to vacancies and the difficulty with renting out bachelor units, which continued to be offered, I gather, to people on the wait list who typically turn them down and wait for a one bedroom. And on page page 6 of the report, it says, building on rapid rehousing approach, TCHC is working with SHA to identify strategies to filling units in hard to rent communities. And I guess, does that specifically reference the bachelor units that we're having so much trouble filling?
So Chair Campbell, to answer your question, absolutely. A lot of the communities that we're speaking about have a concentration of bachelor units. And so we're working with SSHA to determine whether we could provide it building level services to support those communities so that we can also continue to have more tenants coming in. So that's been a challenge for us, and that's exactly it. So we're working on the high needs communities and what supports we could put there.
So the number probably hasn't been moving on the number of vacant bachelor units. And Jag, I guess this will be a question for you. I mean, should consideration be given to not having bachelor units and getting away from bachelor units, and maybe, you know, bringing 2 units together, amalgamating them, and making them 2-bedroom, you know, creating 1-bedroom units or 2-bedroom units out of 2 bachelor units? Has any consideration been given to that?
Through the chair, sorry, in response to your question, Chair, yes, there has been some discussions with respect to that as well. But once again, as Nadia has indicated, we're working with SSHA to determine an appropriate strategy. But that, including other considerations, have been discussed. It's just landing on what would make the best decision for both community housing and, of course, the city as well.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that if nobody wants a bachelor unit, maybe we should stop offering bachelor units. You know, that's what, I mean, that seems to me to be the final logical outcome. If nobody wants them, they're just sitting vacant where people could be living in them. In regard to the tenant management restart, which means really the beginning the process of evicting tenants who aren't paying, it says they have to meet the following criteria, and one is that they have a minimum of $10,000 in arrears. I'm wondering why that number is so high, and how many months of rent past due does that typically represent?
So Chair Campbell, that amount was chosen because we were trying to focus on tenant households that have a significant number of arrears, particularly coming out of COVID. We wanted to be hypersensitive to individual circumstances. And so we started with the most problematic tenancies. And we're starting to have a conversation around looking at either lowering the amount, so looking at a smaller amount, or looking at the timeline of how long somebody hasn't paid. So
Okay.
It depends on the individual rent calculations. Of course, we have some folks in this category that were 2 years rent unpaid. So there's other people that may not reach 10,000 but haven't paid for 2 years, for example. So we did have a discussion with the GMs on revisiting that and looking at a timeline coupled with a total dollar value as the criteria in terms of moving forward.
Okay, so there might be some changes coming there. Okay. All right, thank you. So, a motion to receive the report. Councillor Nunziata, all in favor? Thank you. The next item is the tenant complaints process update, and we have a deputation. Oh, no, we don't. Oh, yes, we do. Tenants. Sorry, we're on E, correct? No, we do not have a deputant on that. No. Okay. I want to ask, are there any questions of the committee members of staff? No. Yes, Mohammed. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, it's not kind of question, but I don't know, I should tell you. Like, is there any way, like, Toronto Housing can create a app, like, you know, the app, so we see that you call to the contact center, you wait longer time. So we can create a app, so any tenant have any issue, so they can take a picture or write down the problem and send to the system, then somebody will follow up. and we need to do like bring like a pending issues, like someone need to verify how many call, like how they, like if I call and they say you send email help at Toronto Housing, but sometime we get response, sometime not. So app maybe help us to reduce this customer complaint. I don't know, maybe.
Thank you, Jag.
Through the chair, it's a great question, and certainly it is something that not only staff have talked about, just given where we are with respect to updating the systems that we have with the homes process and all. It is absolutely something that we are discussing, and we're looking at what it is that we could do to execute on technology similar to what you're saying, similar to the 311 app for the city. So yes, we are talking about it and looking at what it would take for as a next step beyond what we've done from a homes perspective.
Thank you. Anything further? No. Okay, I've got a question. How many people work in this department? The solutions team.
So Chair Campbell, there is a manager of solutions, and I believe she has 4 frontline staff or 4 coordination staff that report to her.
Okay.
Richard, if I'm wrong on that, please jump in.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Confirming it's true.
Right. Okay. Okay. Seeing no further questions from committee members, motion to receive this information. Councilor Nunziata, all in favor? Thank you. Next item, the tenant engagement refresh, and we have a deputation from Kathy Birch. Kathy, are you there? Do we have Kathy?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi, Kathy.
Hi there. I wanted to speak to you about the tenant engagement refresh because in my larger community along the Esplanade, where Toronto Housing has approximately 11 buildings, we have one CSC. And over the last 6 to 8 months, we've had 3 different CSCs and periods of time where we didn't even have a CSC. We also had an issue of the supervisor for the CSC was moved to another position, and the person who was put in for acting has gone on a leave of absence. So now again we have a gap. The CSC that we currently have is causing issues of giving bad information, going to building committee meetings without agendas and printed minutes of meetings, and we've got tenant reps that are stepping down because of the way this particular CSC handles things. And we need to, for 11 buildings, we certainly need more than one CSC, so I see that as a staffing problem. When we've got somebody acting and they go on a leave of absence, again, that leaves a gap in our management team. So I see that we have an HR problem in engagement, that we don't have enough staff for the model that they've put in place, and we're not getting answers. We're not getting responses to emails. And then some of us take it up to our regional managers, even though that's not necessarily the proper step. But when tenants don't have any other answers, they go to who they know that it pertains to their area. So what do we do when we have these HR problems, and the fact that they shuffle around more than a deck of cards in Las Vegas, and you never know from one week to the next who's going to be your CSC. Years ago, and back when, for instance, Will Mendez was acting vice president of resident services, our South Council had asked for binders to be created for every community. So as staff would change, they would still see what was in progress, and it would be able to transition from one CSC to another. That never came to fruition. You know, like we come up with these ideas as tenants as to how you guys can help us, and nothing seems to help. And now we've got multiple buildings trying to get help from a CSC who's ineffective and actually causes more problems than he solves. So what do you want us to do? How, when we don't have enough staff and we've got gaps in management, especially when I try and take stuff then to Julio, for instance, and I gave you his name only because I can't remember his job title. And he's tied up because of issues like Swansea. And so here we are, not knowing who to go to, where we can get help, and when there's not staff in place, there's no notice to the tenant, hey, there's nobody in place, so here's who you need to call. No point in calling the call center. A, it's going to take too long to get an answer. B, they won't have anybody to send it to if we don't even know who our CSC is. So
Okay,
is the engagement refresh working? My advice to you is no, it's not.
Okay. Okay, questions of the deputant, Councillor Fletcher.
I just wanted to kind of thank you, Kathy. It was nice to see you at the opening of the Seniors Corporation the other day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, and I apologize for the noise earlier because I was actually at the third launch. That's what the noise was. My apologies.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just under the old system, what did that look like? You had a tenant council. We heard about that with the money and how people would go there, and then there'd be a staff person who would take that and take it back. Pardon?
We had
elected tenant reps by building, right?
Right. We were elected and we had our council meetings, but if in the meantime you needed your CSC to help you with whatever the project may be or questions you may have, you could get a hold of them fairly easily. I won't say that it was great, but it was certainly better than what I've seen in this new engagement model. And I see it as for at least for Central, honestly, Councillor, these CSCs are getting shuffled around like every few weeks and for whatever reasons. And we've got staff that are leaving left, right, and center.
Okay. So just the continuity is a problem. But when you had the old model, I'm just going to compare. Then there was a monthly meeting of all of the tenant reps with somebody who was a central person. And at that point, if you hadn't had things sorted out, you could start working on them there. Is that right?
That's correct. And we not only had our CSC, we also had building our I can't remember. There were something facilitators who also attended our tenant council meetings, and they helped with preparing minutes and all of those things.
Right.
But
and then,
go ahead.
Sorry. And so that was, I don't want to take too much time. I'm just trying to get a kind of a thumbnail. And those were balloted elections throughout the community, right? I've seen those. You had to run for that. Yeah.
Yes, you did.
And now is there a tenant council still of all the new reps? Was there a balloted election? Are there monthly council meetings? Is it? I think you're saying, pardon? Go ahead.
They're not even getting the meetings scheduled, like with the building committee committee models, on a monthly basis. That's not happening. We've got communities along the Esplanade who had their elections last October and November, and to this day have not had their first full building committee meeting.
Which is kind of like, okay, thank you, Kathy.
Okay, thank you for the deputation. And seeing no further questions, we'll move to questions of staff on the tenant refresh. Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, I just heard there from Kathy, and I'm just wondering if you're having a review of any kind, hearing that the building model was to make sure that there were people meeting in each building, more like a little tenants group that would be watching things. So to hear that it's set up and nobody's not meeting, I would say, no matter what happens, it's good to have tenants together by building. The council with the elected reps was kind of a good funnel. I'm not sure that's still the verticalness of it isn't perhaps working in the same way. And I'm sure you're aware that at the Seniors Corporation and through the stack that they're having a look at the whole tenant engagement model. And I'm wondering if there's things there that you might want to look at based on, I'd say the tenants actually are leading that, which they've insisted on doing at the seniors housing, which has been very helpful for everybody. Is that something that you'd look at here on this one to review? Nadia, where do we think we're at, or what else can we do here?
So through
Sure.
Chair Campbell, Councillor Fletcher, thank you for your comments and question. Right now, this is the last update in terms of elections updates. So we wanted to complete the first cycle of elections. So we are now at 76% representation either through elections or building committees. And so we wanted to establish that system to see if that would start to address some of the concerns we were hearing. We haven't moved on to actually setting up the regional tables. We're putting that in place now and ensuring the building committees are functional. Having said that, we have heard feedback from some of the tenants as well as stakeholders, and we're deeply committed to ensuring that any feedback we receive informs us doing the system better. And so there's a commitment to revisiting, getting more input from tenants. We're hoping to hold a forum in the fall to actually get more tenant input. And if there is significant interest in making changes and amendments, we are committed to doing so as approved by the board and ensuring that we meet the stakeholder requirements as well.
You might be aware from the stack that they get very upset when they talk about elections because the majority of these positions aren't actually an election. And it's going to a meeting and being selected is not an election in the way that former tenant reps like Miss Birch and Miss Wilkinson, who stepped down because of the new system, they were used to a formal election where you had some authority as an elected person, such as I have to do every 4 years. And that's not really the model that we're using.
Councillor Fletcher, maybe I can attempt to describe it and see if it's a little bit clearer. So the model contemplates elected tenant tenant reps through a similar voting process to the one that you would be familiar with historically. As you can imagine, a lot of those positions are acclaimed because there's only one candidate interested in running. The model also added tenant reps positions, so we would get more tenants involved. And so what has happened historically in a building where you might have had an election, because there was only one tenant rep, there are now 2 positions, and so those have turned into acclamations. So the level of elections that you would have seen historically isn't the same. That's accurate. The second piece is it also allowed communities to select building committees, which would not require an election. So the building committees you rightfully described as tenants coming together and participating in their building committee like a small committee, and that wasn't a formal election process. So we've had 2 sort of factors that contributed to less elections, both, I should say 3, because there was a level of apathy during COVID. So we had a lot of positions acclaimed. We also have additional positions, so we needed more candidates to run. So that led to an increase in acclamations. And finally, some of the communities are doing building committees, which wouldn't require an election.
So, but just to confirm that the election is a building-wide election at that point, or is it an election at the meeting that you attend?
It would be a building-wide election if we have more than one candidate running for the tenant rep position in that building.
And how many have you held?
Julio, I don't know if you're
elections.
able to speak to the actual formal election.
I'd like to know how many of those type of elections have been held.
We have about, today we had about 8 to in-person elections throughout.
8 or 8?
About 8, yeah.
8.
8.
Oh, 8. So for all of this, there's been 8.
And then I probably am going to ask, in the past, when there was a larger tenant election process in a community, how many would be actual direct elections with campaigns, etc.? Do you have that info? You might have to go back and get that.
Yes, Councillor Fletcher, I don't know off the top of my mind,
That's
but
fine.
there were dozens, if not over 100. I think we had a
Yes.
voting day. I think that's what you're referring
There
to.
was a voting day. Everybody
right.
knew that. It's very different. And so that I think could, yeah. So it's quite different in that way as far as having somebody representing. And just to confirm again, since we're here again, that the previous elected tenant reps in 2018 were removed by TCHC. Am I correct?
So their term was completed, and so we had I think there was communication sent to the tenant reps upon completion of that term. I believe they were extended for a year, Julio. I don't know if that's accurate. They were extended beyond their term, and at that point we entered into the tenant engagement refresh. So they weren't dismissed formally. Their term was concluded, and because we were moving to a new system, we didn't go through the historical system to replace them. We went through the new system.
And what kind of input were they asked for the new system, since there was hundreds of them? Did you convene a large meeting and talk about what the problems were with the current model? Did you get feedback? You know, they've had in the past, there's been big tenant plenaries where people used to come to the exhibition and talk about one issue facing tenants. So what was your process to discuss the new the proposed new model with the existing tenant reps who had service in that community for a long time? And what was the board's model in instructing you? Was there any? I'm not being critical. I'm just trying to figure out what happened, because.
Thank you very much, Councilor, for the question to the chair. Back in 2015, we initiated with a tenant-led survey of all tenant representatives, where it was called the TAFE5 survey, where tenant representatives were asked to identify concerns with the current tenant engagement system. Right after that, we put together the citywide committee that oversees the review of the tenant engagement system, with heavily representation from former tenant representatives. What happened to that working group, they turned the feedback that they received from tenant reps into recommendations for the refresh. We also have a heavy participation from former tenant representatives through the 6 community forums that we held in 2018 to make decisions about the changes that needed to happen to the system. And former tenant representative also populated the election working group that then finalized our process moving forward in terms of election and so on and so forth.
So the could you have the membership of that group?
I do.
Citywide committee?
I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some of the minutes, that would be helpful
Yeah,
to see that.
yeah.
And how the tenant reps whose terms ran out, what communication was there with them thanking them for their service?
Thank you, Councilor Fletcher, for your question. We held a volunteer appreciation dinner. This was back in 2018, where the actual term was about to finish. We held a regular annual appreciation dinner, and at that point, we asked for an extension of the term, those that were able to stay longer. And that was the main event that we held to honor their contribution to TCHC communities. And later on, they were provided with another letter for the second extension in appreciation for the contribution to the design of the system.
Thank you. And so, as I understood it from earlier, there's no tenant council with elected reps attending a tenant council any longer.
At this point, we're not there, and this is the point that CEO Nadia was referring to. Our next step is to establish that structure of the system.
So that hasn't happened. And I just want to comment, I think 8 elections, we can't call these tenant elections. It's a different process. It infuriates the senior tenants, and it just is a red flag.
we should be careful how we describe something. If
And,
out of all
Councillor,
of these
as
people,
Nadia said, that's because generally there's only one person running, and
sorry, John,
population.
the fact is, we indicated that when we had a different system, there were hundreds of elections, and now we had 8. So that's what I'm saying. I appreciate your point, but if you heard her speak about it, you heard that too. So from hundreds to 8, I think that what's gone on where we're having that many applications rather than kind of an election day, etc. So everybody knows that I think we need to continue reviewing this system, refreshing it, even the refresh. And the seniors have some really good thoughts on that because they're following it forward. I don't think we've had a tenant committee that has been working with staff in this refresh. I think when it was finished, that there is not that same kind of committee. Am I right about that?
So so Julio, maybe you can jump in here. But Councillor Fletcher, there was an oversight committee that was in place. I don't know if they've met recently, Julio, but the oversight committee was involved in the design and certainly supporting the initial implementation.
So let's just maybe have a briefing note what that looks like. Because it's still quite controversial, and I think we've just gone through how they're doing the money. We've gone through this. It's a process. It's taking a long time. I understand there's still a lot of people without anything. And so I'm worried about that. And there you go.
Okay.
And I am also worried, I'm going to say, about those tenant reps that don't feel valued, that gave a lot of service, and they're out there. If you'd like letters, I'm happy to get them for you. So I think still we haven't gotten this to the degree it needs to be. So I'll just ask you again, Nadia, what are the next steps around this, please?
So Councillor Fletcher, as I mentioned, we are interested in getting stakeholder feedback so that we can inform any changes. We don't want to move to changes without getting the feedback that we need. We're hoping to do so at the tenant forum in the fall. Julio and I are discussing other mechanisms to get additional feedback, which will include feedback from former tenant reps who will be invited to the tenant forum as well. So once we get more tenant feedback, and I think that's a commitment that we're making, we will ensure that any changes and recommendations suggested, we bring back to this committee for review. And any changes would be moved through this committee to the board. So that's the next step in terms of us following a process to identify what changes and suggestions tenants have, amendments, and then working through those changes with this committee.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from members of the committee? No, and so Nadia, is part of the problem, is there a general apathy out there in terms of participation? Is it partly because of COVID, or is it just, people not feeling that their participation is going to be meaningful? What can you comment on?
So thank you, Chair Campbell. There are a variety of contributing factors for the apathy, one of which is COVID, one of which was digital engagement, which, as we can acknowledge, isn't the same, and it didn't have that kind of impact. We also went through a restructuring. So our staff changed, our regional model changed. So there were a variety of factors. We've also changed our data management system. So we've had staff in a lot of training. We're also losing staff due to a variety of factors. So there was a lot of contributing factors. We extended the tenant rep election, so the election process, to get more and more tenants engaged. And I think the several extensions made it difficult for tenants who participated initially to want to continue. So there's a little bit of disconnection there. And couple that with the fact that we expanded the system at the same time. So we need more tenants in the system to demonstrate that we've reached sort of full capacity. So we technically have a significantly higher number of tenants involved in the current system now, as opposed to the previous system. So I want to flag that. But I think what has happened is you don't see the level of engagement and competitiveness on the election level that you might have seen historically, but technically there are more tenants involved. I will say that some of the tenants that have been involved may have indicated some concerns to us, and that's what we're trying to address in terms of getting involved initially and not hearing from staff because of staff turnover, staff vacancies, and other concerns. That's what we're also hearing, and we're working to address that.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much.
One more then, just on that, I just want to ask, 8 elections cannot be called the tenant election process. It's a tenant selection process, of which at times there might be elections. And I think that would,
A selection infers an interview and then a choice.
no,
That's what a selection is.
well, an election assumes that you're having an election and going from hundreds to 8. So this bothers tenants, John. I'm just giving you the feedback that I have and I'm passing it on, number one. And number two, I look forward to this. We may end up with some hybrid of some kind, but let's hear from the tenants. And I'm sure you'll hear, if you go to the stack, you will hear about how they feel about that word. And
Right.
I'm asking you to please consult in your deliberations.
You know, if it's definitional, a selection is if people come forward and you select from a group, right? That's not what's happening here. An election is an election if only one person
Okay,
comes
so
forward.
I'm not going to fight with you. I'm going to ask that for however many 374 communities for 8 elections. Anyway, I'm not going to fight with you, John
All right,
Campbell,
in the interest
but I'm
of
going to
time.
ask for Nadia to please, Ms. Gouveia, to, in her people she's speaking with, to speak to the stack, because they've been charged with this very particular thing through the Seniors Corporation, and it might be helpful in your
All right,
deliberations.
so motion to receive the report for information, moved by Councillor Nunziata. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, staff, for the report. Then we have, I don't believe we approved the contract management update, although there are no deputations. Are there any questions on that particular item? Okay, seeing none, motion to approve, moved by Councillor Nunziata. All in favor? Thank you. And then the last item on the agenda, and one for which we have a deputation, it's the tenants first update. And Kathy Birch, are you there? We have a deputation from Kathy. Kathy, are you there? Okay. Dara, I don't hear.
I think so that Ms. Birch was going to try and be conferenced to the meeting by Sonia, but I don't know that Sonia has audio right now. Sonia, can you join Kathy to the meeting?
Sorry, I think she dropped off the line. Shall I get her back?
Well, if I mean, she had indicated she wanted to make a deputation. We should hear it if she would like to do so.
So perhaps we can start with the staff presentation. If we can re-engage with Ms. Birch, we can get her to rejoin.
Okay, so are there questions of staff on the report? Or were we looking for a presentation, Dara, on this?
No, only if there are questions from staff.
Questions of staff on the report and the information? Okay, seeing none. Motion to receive the information. Okay, moved by Councillor Fletcher. All in favor? All right, and I guess she's not there for the deputation. All right. Okay, so that concludes the agenda. Thank you all very much. A motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Nunziata. Thank you, staff, for your time, and it was a little longer than we expected because of the technical difficulties. Thank you.
Hello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, hang on. We're here.
You're there?
Yeah, we're here.
Sorry, Rogers dropped me. So have you adjourned the meeting already?
Yeah, but we're happy to hear what you have to say, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. I won't take long. Regarding the Tenants First update, I would ask this committee to request updates on specifically to shared services. The accessibility program is going to be a shared service with the Seniors Housing Corporation. And there's nothing formally in place right now. And those shared service agreements are not formally in place. And I would, because we're having trouble getting an idea of when that will be in place, although the work still continues, I would ask that this committee make an effort to make sure that they know and that the corporation and the tenants know when it's formally arranged for those shared services to be in place. Whether it be the call center or the accessibility program or any of the other shared services that we will have with the Seniors Housing Corporation. I think our board and this committee needs to know when those agreements are actually formally in place.
All right, okay, thank you for the deputation. Jag, will you be providing us with updates on that, information on that?
Through the chair, absolutely. As we go through the process of the detailed agreement, we will be providing updates.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Thank you all very much, and have a great rest of day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.